Hello and welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. This is me, Pascal Steve. On the other end, it is Steve Hall, and we are going straight into things and talking about how jacked Steve is looking at the moment. The vest, it's vesting time again. Vesting is something different, but man, your shoulders. I haven't seen them in such a long time, and they look massive. It's like Trunks in the background.
Oh, geez. Yeah, he is like Future Trunks, the first Future Trunks.
Yeah.
Like, he is goals. Like, literally, his physique is just like, and something about his hair as well, like having the long hair. It's just like, oh.
Yeah, and he's just this. Like arriving and just like ice cold. Yeah. Destroying things, killing people. Amazing.
I'll take the compliment. It's actually funny. I was considering doing a post on this just as like a bit of a joke on Instagram, just being like, guess what people in this gym have thought I did as like a sport, like rugby, bodybuilding, gymnastics. And I've had a few people come up to me and be like, your arms are ridiculous. Are you a gymnast? And I'm like, no, I'm not a gymnast. Runner. They're like, what do you do for your arms? I'm like, have good parents. They're so disappointed. I'm like you won't ask me about how to train my quads, but I probably know, like, I definitely train those harder. Potentially train them.
That's
better.
The thing, right? I mean, it is, if people aren't aware of that, but this is something that Tom Platz always said, like, don't ask me about my quad training. Ask me about my, whatever it was. I can't even recall what else it was, because you're only, whenever you think about Tom Platz, it's just like the legs.
Yeah. It's so funny you brought up Tom Platz, because I was like, it's like Tom. I compared myself to Tom Platz, which in hindsight, I was like, well, that's a ridiculous comparison. But it made the point. He was like, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad you can't see the biceps, so they're not overshadowing the shoulders, so I can just like keep the shoulders out.
Yeah, they are crazy indeed. I was just complaining about it the other day. People aren't aware of that. But when I was recording a voice message to Steve, I was just complaining about, like, I'm training my biceps very frequently at the moment. And I actually get a very good stimulus from like 2 to 3 sets, as we've discussed, right? And I don't really need more. And I even get some soreness in the biceps, which is just like, it is rare to come by to actually have some soreness in the biceps or arms and delts. Yeah. And I have that on a regular basis. It's not that it's overly crazy where it's like super, super damaging or so, but it's more like I can feel that I did something. And yet I am still here doing a lot of volume, and just take a look at Steve's arms and take a look at mine. It's just, this falls back to what it is that we've discussed in the last episode. It's genetics, right?
And people don't like to admit that it is, but I always appreciate it with like someone like Jared Feather, who's just like, there was that, I shared a post again on my story on Instagram. It was essentially like talent was like a bar like this big, and then like someone who like no talent but hard work, and it was like a bar this big, a bar this big, a bar this big, a bar this big. And I was like, yeah, but when your talent person does that hard work, they start here and they just get better and better and better. Yeah. And that's like Jared Feather. Like he admits he has fantastic genetics, but he also like uses them, and like, but you can, if you're someone listening and you're like, oh man, I'm not sure I have that talent pool, or I don't have that genetics, well, you can work hard and be consistent. You can be as impressive or more impressive than other people, because they just don't use what they have there. So I guess you could use the analogy, it's like that rich kid who's like born wealthy, but often they're the ones who don't like use it because they're kind of comfortable, whereas the person who's like born into not much like wants to work to get more, and then it's like, wow, they make something of themselves like really crazy impressive. So
yeah, but also I had one of my athletes, because he is actually genetically quite blessed. He has like,
lucky him.
It is crazy, and I even told him, right, because we saw each other in person, even because he's prepping at the moment, and he has like a major X-frame. He has one of the most narrow waists I've ever seen in my entire life. Yet he has such a wide back as well, and also a quad sweep. And he's also fairly young still, so great potential there. And I said in the last episode that when you have good genetics. And he said, like, I still don't know whether I have good genetics, because you said that if you know, but I don't know. So, and you're telling me I have good genetics. So sometimes, of course, the ones or there are people out there who are very successful, who are still the ones who have the biggest doubts about themselves. And that's the same there as well. It doesn't mean that only because I'm saying like, if you know, that you should be 100% aware of that. But if you were, I even brought up the example to him, like if I were to cut off your head just in a picture and bring up like 20 pictures of people and compare them to another, and you had to tell me, without you knowing that it's your physique, like who is genetically best here and who isn't, you would be able to tell like he's good, he isn't that good, he is crap, he's actually elite, stuff like that. Right? It's just something, if you're very objective about it, which often is a hard time for us to be fully objective, then you could actually tell most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's, as people who are in this niche of bodybuilding, we can tell, but actually general public cannot tell. Like you put me next to another, like, I don't know, a pro natural bodybuilder, we both look big, and they're just like, yeah, you're both like fucking incredible. It's like, well, no, this guy's like really incredible for this reason. Yeah. And they can't tell. It's like I always complain to Charlotte if she's taking a photo of me and I'm like I want to look jacked in this photo, and she takes it, I'm like, what the fuck is this? You make me look terrible. And it's like, my physique ain't that bad. Like you've somehow found the worst angle. She's just like, I don't know what looks good. Like I can't tell. She has a bit of a better bodybuilding
just taking normal pictures of me. It always turns out bad. And I'm complaining, this is not what I look like. Maybe it is.
I think,
I just look like shit.
Yeah, some people aren't photogenic, but I think you're all right, Pascal. You're a model, so you can. I think Katie just needs to up her skills a little bit.
Yeah, I told her, like, at some point I will send her on a photography course because she takes terrible pictures. And it's so funny because I told you about it, though. I always do those photo albums on a yearly basis where it's like the entire year in a photo album. And I am hardly ever in those pictures because I'm the one responsible for taking all of the pictures. And it's like, okay, here's the photo album of Katie and the kids, right? Instead of me. And it's kind of a rare phenomenon that I'm actually in those pictures myself.
You need to Photoshop yourself in.
Yeah, I guess I have to do that at some point.
I was only going to say the last thing on this, and I don't think we mentioned it, but I don't like bringing this up because I think it upsets some people, and it's the people I'm going to bring up. And it's I say I appreciate, and I kind of said it by saying I appreciate someone like Jared, who isn't essentially saying, I got this physique all due to my hard work. He's like, no, I respect, he like understands science, he understands the importance of genetics. It's like, no, my genetics plus my hard work got me here. And it frustrates someone like myself who dedicates a lot, and lots of the listeners probably, and yourself as well, Pascal. You put everything, like, as much as you can in, like we said last time, and you see these people who are like, yeah, I have crap genetics, it's all just like hard work. And I think I've heard Dave McConey bring up Ben Pakulski quite often, and I think Ben Pakulski has traditionally, and I'm just pulling this off what I think I've heard Dave say, has said like doesn't have great genetics. Maybe it's like calf genetics specifically, he might have said, and he's like crazy calves. He's like, I don't have good genetics. It's like, I don't know, you hear these people who, I don't know, it's like Doug Miller. I don't know if what he says about his genetics, but if Doug Miller was like, oh, I have terrible genetics, you're like, what? I mean, no one at the top of this game, the best, has bad genetics. It's like, come on, like, don't. I mean,
I also have no idea what Ben Pakulski says. It's just more about the message behind it of an IFBB pro saying that he has crappy genetics. Whereas I don't know, Ben Pakulski has probably been on the Olympia stage, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I can't recall, like, honestly. But I think that he wasn't just like an Arnold's competitor or so. I don't know. Sometimes I can't really see through where those guys are competing, whether it's kind of Toronto, Arnold's, yada, yada, yada. But if you are like an IFBB pro in and for itself, you don't just like take that title. You have something to it that is required to actually get.
I think I was listening to, I've forgotten what his name is. It's a big enhanced bodybuild, Fuad, bodybuilding bollocks or something. Yeah, his podcast. I can't remember. The listeners will probably be able to get me in the right realm. But sometimes I just like listen in because they're hilarious. And they're essentially saying like people will think the like guy that comes like, I don't know, 5th or 6th or whatever, the like out of the top 3 at the like Lee Olympia like, who are they? They're not
Continue
special.
talking.
They're not that good. And it's like, well, actually, these individuals are incredible. It's like anyone who gets to that stage is very, very good.
Oh.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, sometimes it's maybe also the easier way in talking you into things and maybe helping you coping with not maybe taking a title or so. It's kind of a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
When you are telling yourself, hey, I don't have what the other guys may have, so I deserve to actually place this well or this way, so maybe a little bit lower than you hope that you would place. Maybe it's a justification for you to make things a little bit easier on yourself.
I imagine there's also individuals, I think we actually probably know of some people who do know they have good genetics and are very good, but almost that sets them up for failure because they're so concerned about, man, people have expectations of me to perform a certain way and I can't like live up to those. Like I'm worried and they just have like self-sabotage and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's that's a different topic in its own right, but I could even see it going against someone where they're just like, man, it's like everything just comes to me so easy. Like I feel bad or like, I don't know. It's just, it's almost intimidating that they have to.
That's the beauty about getting older, actually, because I care less about what other people think of me. Honestly, I think it's such a relief, to be honest. One of my athletes is dealing with that, where he's trying to appeal to other people around him, which is just like a normal psychological trait of humans that you want to appeal, of course. You want to belong to a certain group, and that's why you sometimes do things that you don't really want to do, but you do it because you think that you have to do it. So you're not really true to yourself. And often you realize that looking back in hindsight. And I went through the same thing when I was actually coming to Berlin. Right now, looking back at that time, of course, there have been decisions that I now regret. But of course, it's just because I'm now in my current situation. It's always easy to then judge on past behavior, but I wasn't true to myself on so many occasions, and I would love to turn back time with confidence and the awareness that I have right now and live through those moments again, because I would treat the other person and maybe myself quite differently, because I thought that I'm confident, but in reality I had no confidence whatsoever, honestly, and that's why I was, whenever someone was expecting something from me or requesting something from me, I was always giving in immediately, you know? And that's why I was never really myself. And I was kind of in limbo for a long, long time. And the older you become, the less you care about this and you just do your own thing. And that's, I think it is also then that freeing when it comes to bodybuilding, because after a certain while, you just do bodybuilding because you enjoy it, right? And it doesn't really matter whether other people think that your nutrition is a little bit weird or your dedication is weird. Why would you go to the gym like 5-6 times per week? And then early in the morning, what's fucking wrong with you? When in reality, you're just trying to improve, you're trying to better yourself. And in so many aspects, you're trying to do something good for yourself, right? And at some point, you can just do it without you having the feel that there's a bunch of people behind you talking behind your back. And now it's just like you walk that road with the people who are supporting you behind you instead of shouting at you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've definitely been there, and I'm certainly, yeah. It's there's a fine line between, like, I don't know, who you are as a person, and I think in some ways I am too much of a people pleaser. Like I am a bit, I know sometimes I do it where I'm like, it's easier for me to have this response to this individual because that will lead to their response being something that reflects easier on me or something. I don't know how to describe it. And sometimes it's just, I'm worried. I'm not necessarily doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. And that hurts you in the end anyway. So it's something I'm getting better with, is just like being like, no, just be straight up, say what you think. It's okay. That sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. How's the injuries? How are they holding up? I know you said the ankle still. How's that?
Yeah, the ankle is still a little bit. I'm trying. I'm getting better. I can now slowly do more and more knee flexion movements, so that's good. Wrist is kind of back to normal.
Good.
I'm saying that it's still not 100%, but I can pretty much do everything as I've used to. And I'm pretty confident in that. Also, when I'm already doing kind of pressing movements, like 1 to 2 weeks ago, I was still a little bit hesitant because it was still feeling just slightly off, you know, slightly unstable. And now I'm at a point where it's just like, it feels relatively normal, and I can't really tell the difference between those two sides anymore. So I can really basically hammer my upper body now, which is good.
That's what you wanted.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. And now my career as a men's physique athlete can finally start.
And your split is still, are you doing the push-pull legs?
Yeah.
Push-pull legs? That's still the split. Yeah.
I enjoy that split the most. I'm always thinking, because I really do enjoy, and that's the weird part about things, right? I really do enjoy training the upper body. I don't know what it is. It's just maybe I'm just have become a pussy, because the lower body is just so extreme, and it's sometimes even quite daunting. But I have the feeling that it's just like, I don't know. It's just fun to train the upper body. I mean, training lower body is fun as well, but I've been dealing with a lot of kind of lower body injuries over the years, and that's why it isn't as fun, right? When, I don't know, my left side of the knee flares up again because of kind of, that's what I'm assuming at least, that it kind of has the symptoms of a runner's knee. Because I have to make a confession, by the way, Steve.
You've been running.
No,
No.
we are not going there. We are not taking that far. But I've given people shit in the past about doing something like decline bench press, and I took a couple of steps away from that, as we've discussed in the How to Train Your Chest, that I may have been wrong in the past about this. Well, was very extreme about my opinion about decline pressing, and now I can see some value behind it. And the same goes for, I hate to say it, and I hate to bring it up. No, also rack pulls. That is a step too far. I'm doing now adductor training. I'm actually sitting on the adductor machine and doing that now.
The good or the bad? Oh, wait, I probably should know that one.
But the reason behind it is not because I think that I lack that body part. I could very well be. That's for sure, right? But I do it because I've seen the symptoms that I have. They are very, very similar to what a runner's knee is.
Right.
And what I found, and I could also there be completely wrong in my assumption, and this is something that I wanted to discuss with Mike. So Mike Chattis, our physio in London, when he actually takes a physical assessment of me live. But because of that, many people then recommended doing some adduction work, and because it could be that it's kind of too much of an imbalance there. And I've actually now started to incorporate that, because I thought, like, why not? Let's give it a try. There's no harm in it, trying it, to actually then throw in adduction training or the adduction machine like twice per week. And that's what I'm doing right now. And it's actually quite fun to be on that machine. And in it for itself, it doesn't really require too much of a systemic fatigue or so, and too much of my time. And I'm just hoping that it kind of fixes that kind of sensation. And I really felt when I was actually then getting into the position, and you're pulling apart your legs, right, to actually then get that stretch position, and first then you are in position, right? I could really feel when I'm sitting there that when I'm going too far, I can already feel the pain on my left side, on the outer part, on the lateral part of my knee. So it could very well be that there may be some kind of connection to that. So yeah, but to go back to what I wanted to say, it's because of those kind of things, because of the hip, because of the knee, now also with the ankle. Leg training or lower body training hasn't been a lot of fun over the past couple of weeks and months now. And that's why I think that I do enjoy upper training so much more. And right now, training them 4 times per week, basically, with pull and then the push. It's just something that I do enjoy. And I've considered even, once again, going back to like 3 times per week. But I know from in the past when I've tried that this is just too much. Maybe for the chest, I can get away with that. But for the back, it's way too much.
Interesting. And I think with your adduction, it makes sense to me that you've potentially included it just from the standpoint of, I imagine you're not getting as deep like squatting patterns and things where you're really training your adductors at the like extreme stretched length, where like a really deep leg press, for example, where you just get a big stretch on them, or a deep squat, a deep hack squat, things like this. You're probably, with your ankles the way they are, you're just not able to train them in such a fashion. And also, it reminds me of a time, and this is somewhat, I guess it actually is directly related. I was getting knee pain, and I would find when I would include hip thrusts, lower back. I think it was my lower back. I was getting lower back pain, and whenever I included hip thrusts, it was something like that. But basically, when I included a hip thrust, I would alleviate that. It was kind of like I would activate them more or something, and the pain would reduce in that area. So for a period of time, I was like just doing the hip thrust for like prehab purposes. So I can see why you might even just include these for a short period of time as like a prehab or whatever. And once the pain's gone and you're confident again, you can go really deep in things. You might decide, oh, it's actually now no longer worth training it or what have you. Or you might decide to keep it in. And like that's equally fine as well. And I think it's good to change your like hard opinions on things. I think that's totally respect.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up.
It's funny because we've dealt with this in the past already a couple of times, both you and I, Steve. Whenever there's a time and you see one thing being talked about quite often, you start to believe it. It's just also there. Typical human psychology. I've totally forgotten about the name. There's kind of a name for it. Then when a certain thing is being repeated over and over again, you start to actually believe it or start to take this as the reality. I think it's the illusion effect, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, right now, there's kind of a lot of talk, once again, and I don't know whether this is just like in my small circle that I'm following over on Instagram, about like heavier compound lifts, such as heavy bench pressing, heavy back squatting, and also deadlifts as a fundamental thing for hypertrophy training. And I'm right now finding myself, once again, reconsidering those things. But when I tried that in the past, I have always, or not always, but often dealt with the negative consequences of that. Thing is though, what I want to say, my training and my awareness and the way that I train has also significantly changed over the past 2 to 3 years. I think that I'm a much more mature lifter now than I was back then when I was doing those heavier compound lifts. So I'm even thinking about like, maybe with a newly gained knowledge and with a newly gained awareness of how the body moves in time and space, and also the execution of movements, maybe it is worth now trying it one more time and really getting the most out of those exercises instead of only using the most amount of load. What do you think about this? And have you seen the same thing?
I think I have. I think we probably follow a similar crowd where I've seen it as more of a focusing on the boring basics, as in like you can build a physique through this, look at how many people have over time, and everyone's focusing like these people are seeing a shift of focus towards like potentially SFR, biomechanics and machines and cables. And they're like, no, like look what built all these physiques in the past. And I think as ever, there's this middle ground and you can kind of, you don't want to go too extreme the other way. So I definitely have seen something along those lines. And sometimes like it does make you think about it, but I think it's just kind of swings and roundabouts. Like you see these trends go through and some of them hold and some of them just like pass by. So I think that's also part of it. But it's funny you mentioned, because I'd just been thinking recently, I was like, man, I fancy barbell back squatting again, like high bar squatting. I was just like, I just fancy doing it again. And I think it's good to try it again, and maybe you'll learn, this isn't for me for whatever reason. You're like, right, at least I kind of have learned that. Or maybe you're like, oh, now, like you said, with all this knowledge and experience you've gained, you can execute it in a way where it's just way more effective for you, which is totally fair. Or just enough time has passed where it was once stale and it's no longer like as stale as it was before, or what have you.
I'm also coming from the perspective of like, maybe I just didn't know how to properly use that exercise in the past for hypertrophic reasons. And maybe if I now go back to something like this, I took the time to learn more about myself, but also about just lifting in general. Perhaps it's now a tool that I can use. It's like when you really think about the analogy of like tools, maybe using that tool in the past, I couldn't because I didn't really have the skills for it yet. And I jumped to the intermediate to advanced tools way too early because I thought that I'm ready. And it's the same when you're playing a video game. You don't really want to start at the beginner level. You're jumping immediately to the intermediate. Right? And then you're just like failing, and it takes you much, much longer time to actually evolve instead of starting as a beginner, then make the jump to the intermediate stage when appropriate. And maybe, I'm just thinking, right? As always, we are constantly evolving and we are constantly finding, even us trying to find things that may be more beneficial to us. And while I'm saying that, it's probably going to make a negligible or small difference overall.
Yeah, I think I like the, I don't know if this is a trend, but I like the fundamental kind of discussion behind if you're training hard, you're looking to progress, and you're not being an idiot, you're probably doing the majority and you're getting the majority of the results. And smaller things are smaller things. And you can get into loads of detail, but as long as you're fundamentally doing those things, you're probably getting the most of everything. Yeah. And all these arguments between camps and everything kind of just are like just find your method and kind of enjoy it and stick to it. And
in the end, this is something that we have talked about like so often in the past, that I think having those fundamental things in place first is the most important thing. Right? If you're not training hard, if you're not bringing the intent, and if you don't have a solid program and taking care of like fatigue management, you don't need to worry about something like nutritional timing or whether it's better to have like 10 grams more of glycogen coming from whatever reason or so, right? And this is, I think, where maybe people got lost in all of the information that was out there and have overlooked the most important things. And especially, I can't blame people because I've been there myself, and I think that nearly everyone is going through it. When you are getting into a new topic, no matter what it is, you're interested in a new hobby, everything is valued the same for you. You can't really categorize it. You can't really determine right now what is the most important thing and what isn't, and how much time and effort to put forth into one of those aspects. You just value everything the same. And then over time, it's getting clearer and clearer what actually is the most important thing for you. And when it comes to training and nutrition, maybe people got caught up in all of the information that was floating around there. And it didn't really help that there was then the evidence-based community coming to the forefront, because it just caused people to even more so overthink the minute details, when in reality, you just need to go in there. And I know it sounds super bro-ish, but kind of hammer it, right? And this is also something that we've talked about in one of the last episodes of like, if you don't really make any kind of faces while you're lifting, then are you training really hard enough? Because at some point you can't be helped of just like have an unemotional face or facial expression. In my opinion, you can't train hard when your eyeballs aren't popping out at some point.
Unless you're Jeff Alberts. Jeff Alberts is pretty fucking good at it. Yeah. But I think on that point, his is more of a like, he tries to, I think this is the way I interpret it, at least. He tries to, people get emotional from like rep 1 and you're just like, geez, you're just expending so much excessive fatigue that you don't need to. Like, save that for the final reps. Don't kind of scream and shout from repetition 1 and grunt. And you're just like, come on.
Hey,
this is...
And to be fair, when I take a look sometimes at my sets, especially on the first repetitions, I'm even wondering like, hey man, are you training hard enough? And then once you're coming to those letter reps, then you start to see the intensity popping up and accumulating, right? And And I think that this is also then where the biofeedback is very important, because sometimes to the outsider it can look as if something was freaking easy for you, when in reality you know that you didn't really have a lot in you. And this is something that we've talked about in the past, especially when it comes to back movements. Like lat pull downs is one of those examples. I know people who can grind through it, but I am also someone with the lat pull downs. I can maybe grind 1 repetition, and that doesn't even look like a grinder. And after that, it's over. It's over.
Yeah, it's all momentum, other muscle groups, shoulders rounding over.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. The back, I think, for a lot of people is like that. And yeah, it's hard. It's like you can't grind a pull-up unless you're on an assisted pull-up, maybe. But on like a standard pull-up, it's just it's not going to happen.
That's true.
Should we get to a muscle group? Because we didn't last week.
Which one didn't we have so far?
So we haven't had quads is one we haven't had, and triceps.
No, we had the quads.
Oh, we haven't. Fuck, I thought I checked. I just checked
triceps.
Before,
we didn't have the triceps, and I'm absolutely
or glutes
and glutes. Yeah, I'm absolutely aware that we didn't really have had the triceps. So I would say like let's cover that one, and then I will actually write it down the body parts that we are still missing. So as always, Steve, exercise selection, go. Now.
Cool. So triceps. Yeah, I tend to like to have something with like a vertical pressing movement and like a more horizontal plane movement. So that might be something like a push down or a dip, and something like a skull crusher or a JM press, something like that. They tend to hit a lot of the tricep, and potentially as well now and then cycling in like something overhead, so you're really hitting the long head of the tricep. I don't think it's in like when you are doing a lot of compound lifts and a lot of lifts in general, like you end up hitting muscle groups and you don't even like necessarily realize. I think it's something like a lot on your vertical pulling movements, you hit like the long head of the tricep and you're not even necessarily like, obviously it's not necessary and you hope it's not the limiting factor, but it's getting some work. So I don't think you need to overly obsess about like making sure, like, I don't know, to hit every single angle all the time. Just use some variation. So I tend to like a vertical and then a horizontal. And to be fair, JM press, easy skull crushers, sorry, I say easy skull crushers, but skull crushers in general, dumbbells, you might be in like a machine where you can do like a tricep extension, putting you in that kind of same plane. I like that as like a core movement, and then maybe a dip or like a tricep push down. Now, if someone's doing a tricep push down, I have come to just always recommend people use 2 ropes, because I do find when people try and do push downs and they're inside their shoulders, like you just can't connect with the triceps well. They can't contract well. So I do like shoulder width movements, and generally in like a neutral position versus like a different position. Maybe the easy kind of position is fine, but like it depends on the person. And I'm like, pick the bar that feels good, or like you don't have to overly obsess. I don't have black and white recommendations there. I do also like the tricep cable crossovers. So if you've got like a cable stack where they're quite close to one another, you have them at the top and then cross over. That really gets you a good like my muscle connection and hits the triceps very well. And I also like doing it the other way. So you could do it overhead and do them crossovered. They can be a bit awkward, but I do like doing that. And that actually works really well as like a superset if you want to do that in like a metabolite phase at some point, or metabolite work rather at some point. I think that covers most of the tricep movements I like. There isn't actually, the triceps don't have as many movements as like a bicep. Like there's tons of different bicep variations, but triceps, they're the ones I kind of cycle through most often. I don't know if I might be missing something, but.
That was very good though, Steve.
Oh, okay.
I very much like that, especially the thing that you brought up about the ropes and then on the push down variation. I can just try to complement the things that you said there in the things that I'm doing. So for me personally, I am not the biggest fan of something like JM press or skull crushers, because I found that with a lot of athletes, they are reporting elbow issues. And I often then found that this doesn't even occur when you're just like doing something like tricep push downs or overhead extensions or something alike. That's why I even shied away from prescribing something like JM press or skull crusher, unless that individual doesn't really have access to something like cable towers. I much more prefer using then cable stations for something like direct tricep work. Other than that, we need to also bring up that you get a lot of stimulus already then from normal pressing movements. It's the same when it comes to bicep stimulus, that you're getting already a lot of love for the bicep coming from pulling movements. It's the same for the pressing movements and the tricep. What I found as well is same as you. When it comes to the rope, I'm not the biggest fan of using the rope for then tricep push down. And if so, then do them kind of 2 attachments there, because otherwise it's like I said, you can't really contract it like fully. Also, what I found is that many people, they are not fully extending the elbows when they are doing a tricep movement. They are coming up here, not fully flexing, and not fully extending. They are just like going through that kind of movement the entire time. And what it is that you want to really make sure is to really fully flex and fully come down and really squeeze. I found that squeezing portion of a tricep movement is super crucial. And it's very, very helpful if you're then kind of rowing to some extent with your arms at the stretch at the extended position. So kind of moving the arms back even further and then squeezing the tricep. And that particularly works well with something that you've already talked about, the crossover tricep pushdowns. You can really then focus on like squeezing the elbow through, and by that fully engaging the tricep to a high and significant extent. What I've also found is when it comes to overt extension, many people are experiencing kind of shoulder issues. So an impingement sensation when they are doing it really overhead from below, pushing upwards. So what I would then suggest, if you are someone who's experiencing something like that, use the cables from above, lean forward, and then do it overhead. I found that this helps tremendously when it comes to impingement sensation. And furthermore, there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about. What else was there? Touch on so many things now, and I completely forgot the last thing that I wanted to touch on. Maybe I'll get to that point like later down the line. But one more thing, and that is when it comes to dips, for example, because so many people, and we've brought it up in the past already, they're kind of confused about whether a dip movement is a tricep movement or a chest movement. And there, in a case like this, it boils down to ask yourself, where do you feel it the most? Is it like in the tricep? Then it's primarily a tricep movement for you. Is it primarily in the chest? Then it's more likely that this kind of turns into a chest movement for you. And I guess that's it for now. And maybe I will once again remember the other thing that I've thought of at some point and totally missed that point.
I was only going to say, in addition to with the cables, when I talked about kind of doing them crossovers, if your gym's really busy or you don't have cable stacks close to one another, which I don't at the moment, you can do them single arm as well. And that, again, it completely removes the issue of whether or not your shoulder, like it's wide enough for your shoulders and everything. If you can do it single arm, it's just very easy. It just takes almost double the time.
3 things. So first and foremost, yes, I think that unilateral work on the tricep, if you had a hard time really feeling the tricep and know what it feels like to really kind of fully extend and feel the tricep there, try them unilaterally instead of bilaterally. It really, really helps on a movement like this. And secondarily, when it comes to using or doing something like tricep pushdowns, what I always like to say as a hint and as a cue for people to orientate themselves of how to do it is, imagine that you are doing a skull crusher just with the cable. So you are leaning forward slightly, you're bringing the barbell or the handle to the forehead, and then you are fully extending. Helps tremendously. So it is basically mimicking what a skull crusher is. And then the last point, man, I've forgotten this one as well. So, but I've now touched on the skull crusher thing, and that is the one that I was forgetting about earlier. That's all right.
I do find, I was only going to say with the skull crushers, sometimes going to dumbbells versus like an easy bar, certainly not a straight bar. Straight bars often cause wrist issues for people. Easy bars tend to be a bit better. But like you said, sometimes I do find people can use it for like a couple of mesos and it's like it starts the fatigue due to joint pain and stuff just starts building up. Dumbbells tends to remove that a little bit more, but then eventually, like, it might not be any of those suit you at all. And then with the dips, I was only going to say you can try and emphasize the triceps a bit more if you don't like lean forward into it, and you can notice the difference straight away, because when you lean forward into it, you basically get a huge stretch on the chest, whereas if you try and like lean back into it a little bit, you can emphasize the triceps a bit more. And potentially I've tried pre-fatiguing triceps before it. So like doing tricep push downs, maybe 1 set or 2, then going into dips. Sometimes that helps make the dip a bit more tricep focused.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
I have a question for you, Steve. Just a while ago, one of my athletes had a question for me, and I couldn't really answer that with a lot of confidence. I would assume that the tricep is primarily fast twitch dominant, and that's why it's just like fatiguing very, very quickly. However, he said and reported that when fatigue is kicking in, at some point he can't really fully extend his elbows anymore. He has a very hard time. He can still do the movement, but at some point he can't really. That last little bit where it's like pop the elbow through, he's not capable of that anymore. And this is something that I've noticed as well with high repetitions, and particularly that you're getting to the point where you can't really fully extend the elbows anymore. Do you have any kind of good explanation as to why that is the case, and whether this is something to be worried about or not?
I guess from my my limited understanding of that sort of thing is, I actually think I know exactly what you're talking about, for one. But I think it's similar to, like, I don't know, pull-ups. Like when you're doing pull-ups, you might be able to get like 2/3 of the way up. Once you're fatigued, like you can't get that last bit. It's just the hardest right up at the top. So I think same with like push downs, is hardest in that shortened position of the tricep. So that's where you fatigue and fail first, but you could do the rest of the range of motion. And then it's a question of, should you like, you failed because you can't complete a full range of motion rep and you kind of call it there, or do you continue to like fatigue out and like continue to do the shortened range of motion? And I guess you could argue both ways. That's my understanding of why you'd be failing at that point. I don't think it's something to be worried about though.
No, I so there was more like a question to you that I had, right? Without any kind of pre-biases or so. I neither do I believe that it is anything to be worried about, because it's just like, what is it then? Like a centimeter of a range of motion? I mean, I don't want to be that nitpicky when it comes to the range of motion and all that kind of stuff. I do believe that there's a spectrum to it. It's not like a black or white answer. Either you are hitting full range of motion or you're not, you're half wrapping things. No, there's of course kind of a fine line between those kind of things. And I think that one little centimeter doesn't really make that much of a difference. However, it is quite interesting that little pop of fully extending the elbows becomes much, much harder, and is something that's nearly impossible when fatigue is pretty high on that movement.
I think a lot of people just not do it from the get-go, but I think it's good to, I mean, you train your muscle for a fuller range of motion if you completely lock out the elbow there. So I think it's good to definitely do it when you can. But it's like you said, I think there's a spectrum or a range of like good enough technique. It is very obvious when you're coming out of that. It's like a lat pull down. You could be as strict as, I have to come every rep and touch my chest. Or you might decide, right, I want to touch my chest ideally maybe because that feels great and it's standardized, but I'm going to allow it to come like 1 inch off. But once I can't get it to that 1 inch off without something else coming in, that's where we call it. And you just standardize it then. So he standardizes one guy like a centimeter off locking out. Cool. Once you can't achieve that, that's where you like call your RAR or your whatever the set.
Absolutely. I would love to go over to volume then.
Volume. Cool. So yeah, in terms of them being fast twitch, actually, I tend to find, and actually because, and you mentioned this already really well, in terms of them being involved in pressing to a large degree. So if you're doing, especially overhead pressing, if you're doing like flat incline pressing, you're doing a lot of just big compound pressing. The triceps are being worked tremendously. Like every lockout, they're being worked to a high degree. So they don't tend to need a ton of additional volume. And if they are more fast twitch in nature for some individuals, that probably means they're going to need less sets than, say, like the biceps. And they tend to recover a bit more slowly than the biceps, and they are bigger. So that might kind of have some impact in terms of recovery too, just like they take on more damage. So I tend to find volume for them is on the lower end. So it might be somewhere along the lines of like as little as starting like direct work 4 sets up to maybe 8. For the first week, and then moving up to, I mean, some people can do a lot of direct tricep work, like if they really want to get like big triceps, but maybe somewhere up to like the high, like as high as close to 20 sets, but more closely down like 15 or less for in terms of MRVs. That's what I find, I think.
Very interesting. Once again, I think we've never really talked about it. And we are coming basically to the same conclusion with slight differentiations about like the maximum amount of volume. But yeah, for me personally, it's also kind of 4 is most of the time kind of the minimum and the starting point. It always depends, of course, of how many pressing movements you have in there as well. I mean, if you have just very little pressing movements, probably your starting point can be at around 6-ish or so of direct tricep work. But I found like 4 is already most of the time more than enough. And also intra-session, more than 4 sets is often something that I don't really find to be any stimulating at all anymore. And that is with already kind of maybe 2 different tricep movements of like a push and maybe a pull, right? Where it's like a push down and maybe an overhead extension or so. And then you're already in the last set feeling like, all right, I squeezed everything out. So this brings me then kind of to the maximum amount of volume, where it's like, if we were to just assume that it's 4 sets per session and you do them maybe twice per week, and I think that this is way more reasonable instead of doing them maybe 4 times or so, I would come to the conclusion of like maximum amount of like 12 to maybe even 15 sets if you really want to push it. But 12, I think, is already the upper limit for most people. Everything beyond that is dependent on how many pressing movements you have, and maybe also then your emphasis and whether you want to really put a lot of stock into training the triceps. When it then comes to the frequency, because we've already touched on it, most of the time it's only like 2 times per week. In rare situations when you have like an upper lower split or so, of course I'm squeezing in like 3 times per week, but then I take into consideration that I want to be on the low side of the spectrum when it comes to the tricep volume and not push it all the way up to like 4 sets per session, so that we're then ending up with 12 or so. Often when I have a higher frequency, I have a lower overall session volume, and it brings me then to a frequency of around 2 to 3 times.
Same. I don't think I've programmed more than 3 times per week for triceps. Really weirdly as a side point, my triceps, like my biceps, like you mentioned, like I do 2 sets and they're completely trashed. My triceps can take a way more volume than my biceps. Like they are just, I never seem, and similarly, they don't rarely get sore. They get more sore than my biceps do though. But I have to go out of my way to try and get them sore. And it might be that like if I incorporate an overhead movement that's like in the stretch position, they get sore for like 1 week and then they never get sore again because I've already adapted to it. Yeah, they're an interesting muscle. But no, your explanation there is the same as mine in terms of frequency, absolutely.
Yeah. So when it then comes to the repetition range, what do you find is kind of the sweet spot for then tricep work?
So I think like in terms of heavier loading, they generally get that through maybe pressing movements. So maybe you're like barbell bench pressing or you're machine pressing in like the 10 or less rep range. And I don't program like direct tricep work less than 10 reps. Like dips, even like your reps might drop below 10 when you're doing like dips in a 10 to 15. You might just have like some 8 reps that have come in after you're fatigued, but I never program to start that low in repetitions. And
then again, you could make the argument that dips is kind of
chest,
like a pressing movement, isn't it? I mean, when you can load it very, very heavily, often you don't really do it with the intent of like overloading the tricep. It's more like with the intent of like, hey, I'm already or also doing a lot then for the chest with that movement as well.
Yeah. I find most often probably in and around 15 reps is like the core of the work, because I do find like some of that cable work actually works really well in the higher rep ranges. It seems to just like you can just burn out the tricep, whereas when you do more of the like maybe the machine kind of skull crusher, like the tricep extension machine, that works a bit better, heavier loaded. But like when you're doing, like, I don't know if you feel the same way, Pascal, but I find when people have heavy tricep push downs, very quickly other muscle groups starting coming in, their form breaks down. To truly isolate the tricep, it seems to be better to program like not too heavy essentially. So the median about 15 reps for the most part, and not less than 10 generally, probably not often going more than 20.
I feel the same, to be honest. I think it is a muscle group that can, of course, respond quite well to lower repetition ranges, but primarily it is then with heavier compound lifts, such as pressing movements that, of course, also then take a lot of systemic fatigue and also a lot of stimulus towards then the anterior delts and also then the chest as well. And if you've already worked those to a significant extent and you never really feel that the tricep is the limiting factor, then you want to, of course, incorporate other movements so that you ramp up the volume via other methods. And in that kind of sense, then making use of those machines is always better done in kind of the 10 to 15 repetition range. On some movements, I like to go all the way up to 20, because what I've found is that the tricep is fatiguing very, very quickly in a session. And you can sometimes experience a steep drop in performance, where it's like the first set, you're doing something like 17 repetitions, and the second set is already only down at 11 or 12. So the repetition range, I sometimes like to actually prescribe a little bit wider, maybe in the 10 to 20 repetition range. And also what I found then with tricep movements, it's the same as you, that sometimes people go too heavy. It is one of those movements or those body parts where it's the same as with abs. Especially like weighted cable crunches. People always have the tendency to start with way too much load, and I don't know where this comes from. And whenever you see something like weighted cable crunches, never is someone actually starting with a low amount of weight. They are always using more load, because they are using then other body parts and they think that they are actually the exercise correctly, but in reality, they're just like using a lot of other body parts and muscle groups on that movement. When it comes though to the only thing that is a little bit of a tricky one is, I think, straight handle tricep push down, because you can actually go very, very heavy there and you really have to fight at the same time to not let the form break down. I am always kind of shaking big time, but I still can manage to really bring it up to my forehead and bring it down again. Forehead and down again. And my entire body is shaking because I need to create that tension so that my body isn't kind of shifting places, or I'm actually then more so pushing and pressing with my anterior delts and all that kind of stuff. I have to tense my core, so tense really the midsection, so that my upper body is staying in place and all that kind of stuff, right? So this is one of the only movements that you can load pretty heavily. You still end up in the 10 to 15 repetition range, but you're also running risk of kind of deviating from optimal technique. And then when it comes to something like the crossover cables, you can't really use a lot of load, but at the same time, you get a very, very good mind-muscle connection and biofeedback immediately. You will immediately feel it in the tricep when you hit the triceps well enough.
No, I agree. It's similar to when I'm thinking the machine of like a machine tricep extension. You have to like put yourself in the machine like in a real way to like plant yourself and your body weight so that like your other muscle groups don't come in. So I like the idea of fighting to maintain the tension on the triceps. Like I think
and sometimes on some movements you just have to, and it feels weird at first, but you really have to flex the abs in order to stay stable. I find that also here, straight handle cable curls is one of those movements as well, that when you had a hard leg session, never do straight handle cable curls on the same day, because your legs are just like shaking and you're standing there and then you're doing the bicep curl and it doesn't really feel great, right? You know that feeling where it's like your legs are so fatigued and you're trying to stabilize the entire body with your legs and with your core, and you can't really produce enough force to execute the bicep curls correctly. And the same applies then to something like tricep push down. The way that I described it, it's very, very hard after an intense leg session or when you hit the core very, very hard to still do them appropriately as well.
It reminds me of trying to, like, if you got a crazy quad pump and you try and do calf extensions and you just can't, because the quad can't stabilize the knee, and it's just like you're just fucking fighting. So no, well said. The only thing I have to add was, I can't remember, you said something about the compound lifts and kind of loading the triceps in a heavier rep range. You can bias some of the way you're performing your like pressing movements to be a bit more tricep focused. For example, like a close grip, like a closer grip, like bench press. You could do that, or closer grip, like Smith press or incline press. You can do that. Like I've ran kind of like semi-biased like cycles towards triceps, and I just switched everything to like a closer grip, because then it just biases the triceps a bit more. But
it isn't a lot, right? A lot closer. It's just like maybe a hand width.
Not like, I remember, sorry, this is just ridiculous. When I first started training, and I would do we're like, let's do close grip bench press. And we would literally like next to each other and try and press it down. Yeah. And the guy at the gym was like, just at least do one thumb and like come here. And I was like, after a while, I'm like, oh, close grip is just inside your normal grip.
Yeah, exactly. I always, it's funny because you still regularly see that, and there's no shame in actually going through the process of doing it that way, and then learning for yourself that it's actually not an efficient and strong base to push off from.
It's awful.
Yeah, it is. And then it's just, I learned it very early because when I was a powerlifter and I was still training with Mike Teixeira, it was the rule of thumb, like maximum, like a hand width inside. That's all you need. Normal grip, take it there, and then move it like one palm inside. And that's basically enough to focus or put a little bit more emphasis than on the tricep.
Are we on tips or tricks?
Tips and tricks, but I really do believe that we've covered a lot of tips and tricks already throughout the entire guide, unless you have something that we've missed.
The only thing I would say is I do find triceps respond quite well to like metabolite techniques. Mm-hmm. So like short rest periods, lighter loads, they do tend to respond quite well. So like the one I liked was the crossover from the bottom and then crossover overhead. That seems to work quite well. I have trialed other ones where I've done like basically an isolation lift into a compound. So you might do like a dumbbell skull crusher into like a close grip dumbbell press. They tend to work okay, but yeah, just I think they're one of the muscle groups, for me at least, and with my clients I found do tend to respond quite well to metabolite type of work. That's the only tip or trick.
Yeah, I have not really any kind of other tips and tricks. I think that we've covered, or we've really put a lot into this guide already, and I would assume that there are lots of things for people to take away. Things to avoid. Anything that
I think we did really well as we were going through, like things to avoid. I can't think of anything like that. I generally just see people using too much load. Yeah, that's what I see, and they let technique break down, and they're not isolating the tricep.
One thing that can be mentioned, and you've kind of slightly touched on it, is you don't have to stress overly about like hitting the long head of the tricep, or just like, I mean, do proper tricep training and then you are probably covered. Honestly, I think that when you have like pressing movements in there and you do something like a tricep push down maybe, and maybe even overhead extension, which is kind of more like on the long head side of things, but you don't necessarily need to have something like overhead, especially when you are experiencing some kind of impingement sensation or so. I don't really think that you need to stress about it. I think that I would be very surprised if you could detect it on a person, where it's like, all right, he has definitely always trained his long head and he didn't. if your tricep is great, it's great all across the board instead of just like one part of the tricep. I would very much assume that this is going to be the case. So if you train the tricep, and don't really stress too much about like, I need to have a good ratio of like between the long head and all that kind of stuff.
No, I think that's well said. I can't think of anything else.
Cool. No.
So we can leave it there, I think.
That's good. Basically it. I mean, we are coming closer and closer to the London seminar now. Once this episode is coming out, we have like 1 more month to go. 1 more month. It's crazy because here today I got the cancellation of my flight to London, which stressed me out a little bit. So I needed to actually do I even needed to call British Airways. Like, I hate calling people nowadays.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find any kind of option of just like doing everything online. And
email.
I mean, nowadays, especially after Corona, you would assume that everything is already digitalized when it comes to those kind of things. And you can't. And I needed to call and yada, yada, yada. Long story short, 1 more month to go for London seminar. I will be there. I've actually changed my flights. So that's a good news. And you still have the opportunity to come. Head over to revivestronger.com/product/London, London Seminar 2020. If I remember correctly, doesn't really matter. You will find the link below. Get your ticket, and then we will have a freaking fantastic time there. I'm still so pumped, still so much looking forward to that. After 3 years, finally being back at doing something like this, and it's going to be very well organized because Steve and I, we have a very good plan about how we want to run this year. Of like, okay, this is how it's run, but you have to be there in order to actually then experience it for yourself.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Don't miss it. You only regret it. There's so many quotes online that you can find out like these that you don't regret the things that you did do. You only regret the things you didn't do, type of thing.
But I mean, every kind of salesperson is going to say that maybe we need to actually do it the other way around. You actually don't want to be there. Don't get your ticket. It's going to be awful. Don't. I mean, you could go over to Revive Stronger and get a ticket, but don't. I very much recommend that you don't. We are already there, so better save the money.
We don't want you to have a fantastic time.
Exactly.
So. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you very soon. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Steve. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.